Okay. Now we're good. We have Amerra Nixon.
Hi, my name is Amerra Nixon. For my senior thesis, I chose to analyze the narrator's journey with self-identity as seen in The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. First, I would like to introduce some of my characters. The first character is the narrator, who will be referred to as the protagonist, the main character, and the Invisible Man. Brother Jack is a Caucasian man and the leader of the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood is a group of men who have a common interest to give a voice to the minorities. Bledsoe is an African American and the president of the Narrator's College. Mary is an African American and the Invisible Man's motherly figure. Ross the Exhorter is a violent character who is against the Brotherhood. Clifton is a Brotherhood member who was shot and killed by police. True Blood is a guy who was praised by white men after getting his daughter pregnant. And Lucius is the narrator's trainer while working at Liberty Paints. At one point or another, we've all dealt with losing who we are. The eponymous narrator allows us to follow his journey with self-identity. By analyzing his life changes, we are able to see how blindness and invisibility directly relate to one's freedom and self-identity. This book is about the unnamed narrator who encounters racism, betrayal, and pain. He is looking for himself and others, and he is looking for freedom. First, I would like to define self-identity. Self-identity is accepting all of our flaws and attributes without letting outside opinions influence who we think we are. The term invisible in this book is not literal. The narrator is invisible to himself because he chooses to get comfortable in uncomfortable situations, and he is invisible to others because he does not want to change his appearance for African Americans, and he refuses, and Caucasian men refuse to see him because of the color of his skin. The idea of freedom is very important in my book. The narrator asks a woman on the street what she thinks freedom is. She says, "I think it is one thing, and then I think it is another." This shows that she has a confusion when it comes to answering questions that would seem like something that you should know. And it shows how sometimes we are willing to accept the definitions that are given to us without finding out what they personally mean to us. The main character says he'll be free once he discovers who he is. This shows his awareness. Typically, we are aware of how we feel in certain situations, but we don't know how to change it, and this is the case with the narrator. Invisibility, blindness, and formlessness are three common themes seen throughout my book. Our job is not to ask them what they think, but to tell them. This is a quote from Brother Jack to the narrator in my book. The narrator is upset when Brother Jack tells him this because for his whole life he's been told how to think and how to act, and he thinks that by the Brotherhood doing this, they are taking away the freedom of the civilians by manipulating them into being blind. Formlessness is seen through Bledsoe. He is introduced as a role model to the narrator, and he turns into someone who has evil intentions. Brother Jack is someone who is introduced as a skeptical character, and he changes into someone that the narrator can confide in, and he again changes into someone who betrays the main character. Formlessness is also seen through the narrator's changes. Everything that is formless helps shape who the narrator is. He is sweet like Mary, bold like Clifton, and determined like Bledsoe. By analyzing the word choice, we are able to see how the narrator changes with communication. Bledsoe says, "There were no trees, no flowers, and no fertile farmland." Later, the narrator also goes to describe the absence of things. He does note expressions and actions of other characters, which shows that he is taking in everything around him. By doing this, he is able to find out who he wants to be through other people. Social responsibility is seen in the narrator's first speech. When he is giving his speech, he changes his wording from social responsibility to social equality to get the audience's attention. He also thinks that it's a social responsibility to give his speech to the characters in the book because he thinks it's the message that they need to hear. After Clifton is shot by police, his excuse to the Brotherhood is that it was his social responsibility to plan his funeral. And as mentioned before, Brother Jack thinks it's his responsibility to tell the people what they think. In this story and in life, social responsibility holds us back. It puts people in a box, and it makes them think that they should act according to the role that has been given to them by society. The narrator throughout the story is referred to as part of African Americans, a worker, an experiment, and a new guy. Throughout the whole book, his name is not mentioned once. This shows a lack of individuality. His environment forces him to be blind, invisible, and a forgettable man. This shows that he is truly a figment of our imagination. Throughout the book, the narrator is constantly given hope for things in his life, and then that hope is taken away from him. One example of this is when the narrator gets letters from his prior boss, Bledsoe, to give to his potential bosses. The narrator finds out that in these letters, there is negative things written about him. When he becomes a part of the Brotherhood, he is hopeful and he is inspired because other people are willing to listen to his speeches because of the passion that he puts behind his words. They then turn around and scam him, and he finds out that they only want him for his passion and not for what he has to say. These examples can be summed up into one quote: "I measured the glistening black drop, seeing them settle upon the surface and become blacker still, spreading suddenly out to the edges." This quote sums up the narrator's repeating life. It shows how he's constantly given hope that is turned into something that hinders him in life, and it follows him everywhere that he goes. Suddenly we see his word choice change. This constant letdown makes him change his way of thinking, and we see that reflected throughout the book. He describes the spotlight as a cage, and he quotes mechanical isolation of a hospital machine, referring to when he was tortured in a hospital. He is choosing to let the good opportunities in his life hinder him and be looked at as something that's negative instead of looking at the beauty in his current situations. The narrator is constantly giving advice throughout his life. Brother Jack tells him to argue his ideas with platonic skills and to be quiet. We see the narrator use this advice with Rastak's disorder to find a middle ground. The veterinarian tells the narrator to be his own father, and he stops looking for approval from everyone. Bledsoe tells him to not blind himself, and we are able to see this at the end of the book. Although he doesn't want to follow all of their advice without realizing it, he does follow what they are telling him. This goes to prove that our environment affects who we are and what we do. At the end, the narrator has a dream, and all three of these pieces of advice come back in a more violent way as a reminder. Brother Jack's advice comes back when a spear goes through Brass's mouth, through one side of Brass's mouth and out of the other. The vet's advice comes into effect when the narrator's manhood is physically removed. Bledsoe's advice is seen when the narrator's eyes are cut out. At this moment, he has no choice but to follow what they said. He is also stabbed by everyone in the book because ultimately the environment that he was trapped in is his current situation. Proving again that our environment, blindness, and invisibility affect our freedom and self. At the very last part of the book, the narrator says, "But your son, your moon, he is not giving up on himself, but he's giving up on the world. He is no longer blind, but he realizes that the world is. He is done dealing with the world's discrepancies. I didn't understand in those pre-invisible days that their hate and mine was too charged with fear. They are scared to see the truth, so they don't." After reviewing all of this information, we can see that he is held back by his skin, the truth that others refuse to see, the blindness of himself, and trying to uphold individual standards put on him. Let the Invisible Man story show you how who we surround ourselves with determines our future and how others perceive us. Whether or not we want to, By breaking standards, we are able to choose if we want to be free of illusions. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so how would you say, like, how would you, like, if somebody was to come up to you and ask you, how do I discover my identity, like the true meaning of society things, what would you tell them?
I think that most people don't really know who they are until it's too late. I don't think the problem is finding our self-identity. I think the problem is not being comfortable with who we are while we're on that journey.
Okay. So in the book, you talk about individuality, and you say that the invisible man isn't like he's not. He doesn't have his own individuality. But if we're going back to that time frame, right? A lot of people of color, they didn't care what other people said, and it really did hurt them, but they chose to ignore it. At the end of the book, he just doesn't care. So in some way, do you think he does kind of have his own individuality?
Throughout the book as a whole, or at the end of the book?
At the end, or as a whole?
As a whole, I think that he does, but to a certain extent, he isn't allowed to be who he truly is. And I don't think if you can't express who you are, then I don't think there's any value to that. It was really hard for me to put myself in the position of the narrator since it is a different time period. But in some ways, I think he did, but I think it was harder for him to show it.
So you talked about self-identity, and it was enlightening to hear the young lady who said that sometimes freedom is this and sometimes freedom is that. Do you think that's true of self-identity? Is it a one-day awakening, or do you think it's progressive and it changes throughout life?
Well, I don't think, even with the woman's quote, I don't think that it's a one-day thing. I think that she just she never took the time out to discover what freedom meant to her as an individual. And I think the same thing with self-identity. Sometimes we're just not aware that we don't know who we are. And sometimes we don't know how to go about making that change to discover who we are.
So you said that environment is one of the things that affects us in this book. How is the author not giving the narrator an actual name? How does that change the environment of the book for you as a reader?
I think it shows just how unimportant the narrator wants us to view them as. It really shows that he doesn't have a voice, and it helps. Like I said, I had a hard time putting myself in his place. But I think by him not giving him a name, it helps us in one aspect to see this is just how unimportant he was.
So do you think it's important to be aware of the fact that we don't know who we truly are?
Yes, I think it is important. And I think it's important to start making changes to discover who we are. I don't think it's okay to just sit there knowing that you don't know who you are and not do anything to change it.
My question is, did he really know who he was, or did he just kind of retract from the world and give up?
At the end, he gave up. He gave up on the world because he realized if you don't want to see the truth, then there's nothing that he could do to make them see the truth. So I think that he did give up, but not on himself. I think he just realized that he couldn't make them see who he was. He just had to be comfortable within himself.
Yeah, that was my biggest question. I guess, did he give up on himself, altogether?
Yeah. Not on himself, on the world.
Just on the world.
Yeah.
So I love one of the lines at the end of the book, buried in the cave at the beginning. He tells us his story, and then at the end he says he's ready to face the world again. What does that mean? Because he doesn't like the world anymore. What does it mean that he's buried himself away told us all this and then says he's ready to go back into the world.
Well, throughout every single time that he goes into a new environment, like when he moves to New York, he is coming in with the same mindset, like, oh, I'm gonna get this new job and I'm gonna have these better experiences. I think that at the end of the book, when he says that he's ready to face the world, he's ready to change his outlook, he's ready to change the way that he handles the situation. At first, he was just going in with the same approach, and now he's understanding, like, I can't make them understand me. And I think he's just trying to go with something new.
It's about time. Do we want to keep going?
No, I think we
Okay,
have
because it
to
is-
schedule.
I know. I'm sorry, I'm so serious.
That was good volume.
I was thinking about that halfway